If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what's the creepiest/scariest thing you've ever experienced in your life? Standing on the front stoop of my apartment at 2 a.m. smoking a cigarette. Dead silence the entire time I was standing there. All at once a train horn blows, the little 5-year-old girl next door screams, and a wind gust comes out of nowhere, slamming the open door against my shoulder. I swear to God, for exactly 1 second I thought I was being attacked by a ghost. My heart was pounding and I thought I was gonna cry. That shit probably took 2 years off of my life. For the record, little girl screamed probably cause her and her mama always stayed up late and were probably playing. This was a long time ago. About 25 years ago. I had tree trimmers out at my house for the last 2 days. I lived alone at the time. I did have the presence of mind to set out some men's shoes on the porch, but after being there for 2 days, for someone who was paying attention, it was pretty obvious I was a single woman. The night the crew finished up, I was upstairs in bed. It was late. Around 1 a.m. My car was in the driveway, my bedroom light was on, so it was obvious someone was home. I was in bed reading when I heard a noise downstairs. It was a familiar noise, but I couldn't quite place it. I laid there listening and heard it again, followed by the sound of things falling onto the floor. It hit me then what the noise was. One of my window screens being pushed open, followed by books I had lined up along the windowsill falling. I was totally frozen in fear for a minute. Just laying there with all my senses on high alert. Then I heard another thumping noise. What I assume was the sound of feet landing on the wooden floor. There was someone in my house. That's when I grabbed the bat I had next to the bed and went to grab the phone. This was before cell phones, back in the time of landlines and cordless phones. That's when I realized I had left the cordless downstairs. I locked my bedroom door and started screaming that I knew they were there, that I had a gun and I was on the phone with the police. I proceeded to pretend like I was on the phone with 911. I opened my bedroom window and removed the screen, getting it ready in case I had to jump out my window. I don't know if it was me opening my window or maybe my screaming, but something set off my neighbor's dogs. They started barking and moving around, which turned on the motion sensor lights in my neighbor's backyard. I went to stand at my door with my ear pressed against it, listening, still continuing my fake 911 conversation. It was an old house with wood creaky stairs, so if they started up the stairs I would hear them. It was dead silent. Then I heard scuffing noise, the sound of the window downstairs rattling, followed by the sounds of someone running beneath my bedroom window. Something scared him off and he jumped back out the same window he came in. I went to my window and looked out, but I couldn't see anything. Whether it was me yelling that I was armed, pretending like the police were on their way, or the dogs barking, I'll never know. I had to get the cordless phone to call police. I knew where it was, sitting on the kitchen table. I stood there listening for a long time, fucking terrified. I really thought I might have a heart attack. I was shaking, my heart was beating so fast, I had so much adrenaline running through my body. Finally, I unlocked my door, had my bat at the ready, and I crept down the stairs, into the kitchen, grabbed the phone, and then I took off and ran up the stairs 2 at a time, locked the door and called 911 and waited until they arrived. I walked with them while they inspected the house. The window in the study was standing open, the screen removed, books I had lined up along the windowsill were scattered on the ground. It was damp out and there were bits of dirt and leaves on the floor from someone's shoes. Outside the window was a step stool taken from my garage. I'll never forget seeing the bits of leaves and mud on my floor. It was proof someone had actually been in my house. He had been standing in my study. He knew I was home when he made entry. One of the first things the cops asked me was if I had any work done on my house recently. Tree trimmers. I'm sure it was one of them. They had been around for 2 days. Long enough to get a general idea of the house layout and to ascertain I was a single female. I was so scared after that to stay in my house. I felt so incredibly lucky he got scared off, but what if he came back? I felt violated and I was angry. I spent the next few months either staying with my mom or having someone stay in my house with me. The only reason that window was unlocked was because the lock was broken. I had that fixed, and for extra insurance I put nails in so they would block the window from being opened. I would have installed a security system, but I simply couldn't afford it. The company was contacted, but there was no proof it was anyone from their crew, so there wasn't a whole lot to do aside from letting the owner know. Anyway, that was terrifying. To be a young woman alone in her house late at night and hearing someone climb through a window makes you feel so incredibly vulnerable. I'm very lucky. This person did not come to rob me, I'm sure of that. He knew I was home. He wanted me. If I hadn't still been awake I wouldn't have heard him and things may have ended very differently. Alright. I don't usually reply to this stuff, but I got one. I'm about 16 at the time, just relaxing at home alone watching TV in the dark with my bulldog named Harley. So we're laying together on the couch sharing snacks or whatever, and all of a sudden Harley gets up and slowly walks towards the hallway by the TV hunched over in attack mode. And I see his hair on his back stand up, and at the same time so does mine, and I'm covered in goosebumps and fear. I slowly stood up too, and we both just looked into the hallway, which seemed darker than the rest of the house, and it just felt like something was there looking back. A moment later it passed, Harley eases up and I run and turn every light on in the house. I still get chills thinking about it. I used to pet Harley and wonder if he still thought about that night too, but he was such a happy fat dog it probably never bothered him. He died in 2010 at the age of 12. When I was maybe 6 or 7, I was staying the night at my grandparents' house. I was on the couch trying to sleep when I heard whispering. They had a painting of my aunt hanging on the wall in the living room, and it was talking to me. Nothing creepy though. It was talking the way my aunt would talk to me. Asking me if I was behaving in typical aunt talk. She tells me to wake my grandfather up because she needs to talk to him. I did, and when he realized she wasn't there he began scolding me. In between threats and insults he noticed someone moving outside the window. He grabbed his pistol and told me to stay in the room with my grandmother. A minute or two later we hear a gunshot. Turns out there's a prison for young adults about 20 miles from where they live. 3 of them killed a guard and escaped. They were sizing the house up to take his truck and whatever they could, but he saw them first. Ended up shooting one of them in the shoulder. I have no idea why that fucking picture was talking to me. They've never experienced ghosts before or since. My childhood home was straight up haunted. My sister frequently complained about faces in the lights. My brother, maybe 5 at the time, came running in the house crying because the man hanging in the garage scared him. There was nobody there. I once woke up to a dark figure standing over my bed. I slept on the floor of my parents' room for days after that. There was an honest-to-God cave in the basement. Dirt walls, went back maybe 15 feet. I never went in there, so I can't say what was in it. Electronic devices would sometimes turn on by themselves. Our dog would stare at one corner in one room and growl. Eventually we ended up buying our neighbor's house. Right across the street. One night, after the neighbors had moved out but we hadn't yet moved in, my whole family was asleep. It was the middle of the night. Suddenly the fire alarms start going off. We all wake up and my dad checks the house. Everything is fine. He takes the batteries out of the alarms and we all go back to bed. An hour or so later, we wake up to alarms again. This time it's the carbon monoxide detectors and the no battery fire alarms. My dad turns off the alarms, we grab blankets and sleeping bags, and we leave. That night we sleep in a big family huddle in the living room of our new house. My parents called someone to check the carbon monoxide at the house, and they report back that everything was normal. The next day we started moving and never slept in that house again. I've never experienced anything paranormal since then. Creepiest, I was in New York taking a training course and I was up late writing a paper. When I finished, it was about 3 a.m. so I decided to go downtown, find a Kinko's, print the paper and then go to a diner and study before class. I was standing on the platform waiting when suddenly I saw a massive black man, around 6 feet 4 inches, in a yellow leather suit with matching fedora, and the whites of his eyes were blood red. He's standing about a meter away from me, just staring at me. He didn't make any noise, he just sort of showed up. I got on the subway and so did he, sitting across from me, staring directly at me. No blinking, no speaking, just staring until I got off. Scariest, one night, my wife was in Europe on a business trip, so my daughter, who was about 10 years old at the time, and I were alone in the house. I got up at about 2 a.m. because I could not sleep. I went into the living room to sit down, but I didn't turn on the lights, because I didn't want to wake my daughter, but she was actually awake and thought it would be fun to creep up behind me and surprise me. I walked into the living room, I looked at the plate glass window leading to the balcony and saw someone standing behind me. I yelled and swung around, but at the last split second realized it was my daughter. If my instincts had been any slower, I would have punched my daughter in the face with full force. I am not sure which is scarier, being scared in the first place, or almost belting my little girl in the face. I had this dream that my brother killed someone and hid the body in our pool. It was in the winter and the tarp was on, so he was able to hide the body for some time. Eventually spring came and he was trying to get the body out to hide it, but it was so waterlogged that it was falling apart in his hands. The freaky thing is how real it felt and the amount of detail. It felt like I was actually living this in real life. I could remember news reports about the missing person, how I found out that he killed the man, My mom begging me not to report him to the police, the rotting flesh melting off the face of the dead person as he took it out of the pool, the police sirens, and it ended with me being so traumatized of what I saw I was placed in a mental health ward. I woke up crying and it took hours for me to calm down and start my day. It took a day or two to finally understand and process it was a dream. It took months for me not to be scared of my brother. My brother is super chill and the person in the dream was the complete opposite of him in real life. It's weird to explain, but I felt that I had to learn how to trust him again. It's been years since the dream, but it was so real and lucid. I've never had such a lucid dream since, and I really hope I don't. It happened at my dad's house in Mexico. It was only me and my older brother home. My dad was working and it was already night out. But we were used to it. My dad's friends always told us stories about the little girl that would never let them use the restroom because she would stand in front of it. They would go to my dad's house to drink it up but we would just take it as a joke. Until that night I was in my dad's room and my brother was in the living room. I was laying down, face up, the TV was on a corner on the right side of the room, the bed was on the right side against the wall also. And the door was on the left corner in front of me. And right outside of the door there's about 5 feet to get to another room, and in the middle there's a door to go to the rest of the house. Not a big house at all. Well, in front of that doorway if you turned right the restroom was right there as soon as you turned. And the sink was visible from the bed where I was laying. And the sink was also visible from where my brother was laying in the living room, but we couldn't see each other. Every light in the house is off, the only light is coming from both TVs. As I'm watching TV from the corner of my left eye I see something white appear, and of course I turn to look and I see a little girl standing in front of the sink. Well, I see a silhouette of a little girl. She was wearing a dress and was a little bit taller than the sink she was in front of. Average sink. As I'm looking at this little spirit I am aware at what I'm looking at, so after about 4 seconds I decide to blink and of course it went away and told myself it was my mind playing tricks. Like most of us do. A few minutes later my brother comes in the room and goes, "Did you see that?" And I go, "Did I see what?" Still not being sure about what he's talking about. It crossed my mind for a second that he was talking about the little girl, but that was crazy. So I didn't even think that could be what he was talking about. So he asks again, "You didn't see that?" And then I said again, "Did I see what?" Then he finally says, "Did you see the little girl?" So we saw the same ghost child at the same time while in different spots on the house. Back in the 1980s, growing up in suburban Chicago, my brother, some friends and I got into using the Ouija board. Of course when our mom found out she quickly condemned it, like that was going to stop us. One afternoon we were in my bedroom on the second floor with brother and a few friends with the lights low messing with our homemade Ouija board. We were pretty young and getting ourselves pretty amped up about the spirit world when all of a sudden there was someone slamming on the bedroom window. Mind you, we were on the second floor, so this couldn't just be some random person walking by. We all turned to look and there it was, a scary face staring at us through the window. With no time to focus on its face, it took all of about a second for us to jump up and run downstairs. When we get down there the front door opens up and there it is, inside our house. A few seconds later it's pulling a stocking off its head. Guess who it is? Mom. She knew what we were up to, went to the garage, got a ladder, put the stocking on her head, beat on our window and took about 10 years off all of our lives. She was laughing hysterically. Good one, Mom. This is the story of how a creepy encounter with a scary man at a harbor cafe saved me from something even more terrifying. It was in the autumn of 1994 and I was 19 years old. At the time my dad had been working for almost 6 months abroad, and I was planning a surprise visit. My dad and I have always been close. I am an only child and my mother died in cancer when I was still a baby. So it was just my dad and I, really, a tiny little family, but he made up for it by being the most awesome parent ever. Now that I wasn't a little kid anymore, I appreciated that more and more. I had booked the ticket and was ready to go. It was going to be great fun to surprise him with a visit. I had to take the ferry though, and I had just gotten my driving license and felt really unhappy about having to drive my little car on board the ferry, and decided to not bring a car at all, and just rent one once I got there. Having time to spend, I decided to have coffee at a nearby cafe since I was early and they hadn't started letting people onto the ferry just yet. At the cafe there were lots of truck drivers and I soon realized I was the only woman there. One man, a 40-ish bloke with ice blue eyes and tattoos all over, was eyeing me from across the room, not even trying to be discreet about it. I got up to leave, feeling suddenly very uncomfortable, and to my utter horror he followed. What do I do now? I asked myself. This was before everyone owned a cell phone, I might add. I decided to try and look busy and maybe he would leave me alone. So I pulled out my ticket and tried to look like I was reading it carefully, when he suddenly snatched it from my hand and said, "I'm on the same boat." "I'll have hours of your company then." "How lovely," he said in a voice that was an absurd combination of jovial flattery and hidden hostility. I felt it very strongly that if I got on that boat, with this man who now knew my booking details, I'd be in grave danger. I can't explain why the feeling was so overwhelming, but it was, and I decided there and then to not get on the boat. The ticket had been cheap anyway, I could get on the next one instead. I hid in the ladies' room until I knew the ferry had left, and then I went to rebook my ticket. The story could have ended here, a creepy encounter with a stalkerish man, but it doesn't. I was right in the assumption that getting on that ferry would have been unbelievably dangerous. Have you figured it out yet? The date was September 28, 1994, the name of the ship was MS Estonia, and that cold night she sank in the Baltic Sea, taking 852 people with her, resulting in the worst ferry catastrophe to strike Sweden to this day. I still recall that day with horror, and wonder what would have happened if this creepy man had not taken an interest in me? If I had not listened to my instinct and gotten on board instead of waiting for the next boat. Would I have been among the survivors? Or would my dad have seen my name on the list of lives lost in the Baltic Sea? I was 12, hanging out with the next door neighbor's kid EJ, also 12 years old. His parents went to a movie, so it's just us playing Sega upstairs. After a round of the game we were playing, he stands up and walks down the hall to his parents' bedroom. I'm chilling and I hear him all excited, "Dude, check this out." I walk down the hall. He's sitting on his parents' bed, the whole room is dark minus a lamp he had turned on. He's holding his dad's .38. He looks up at me, smiles the creepiest grin and says, "It was really nice knowing you," and puts a bullet through his mouth. I noped the hell out. I didn't eat for a week, I couldn't sleep. But, I also was physically unable to talk. Literally, I was unable to open my mouth. And there was a voice screaming at me the whole time, "If you tell, you die." A week later, I woke up and was suddenly able to talk again, and I told my parents what happened. Of course, mortified, they called the family. They were in Spain for the past month. And it was perfectly fine. I saw psychiatrists for years, and I still wasn't able to find a valid answer to that. One psych said it was probably a bad dream. Yet I still have identical trauma to someone who's seen death at a young age. Now I'm one of those skeptic types. I don't believe in ghosts, UFOs, or Bigfoot. I need some hard evidence and I'll take the scientific method over a psychic any day. But one night makes me wonder. This was a few years back during the summer before I left for college. It was one of those perfect summers. I was with a group of friends and we were extremely bored. So one friend brought up the idea to go ghost hunting. The top candidate was a place called Bale Hill. Who doesn't love a good ghost story? So 5 of us hop in my old Chevy Cavalier and we go off into the Pennsylvania countryside. Along the way we're telling jokes and listening to music. Until we get there and start up the hill. Aside from a few farmhouses it's totally dark, so we go up the hill, quick turn at the top and slowly go down the dirt road. About halfway down I stop the car and see this creepy collection of wood. It was an old fence. This thing looked like something out of the Blair Witch and I was transfixed on it and the dark around us. That darkness was suffocating. While looking at the fence I hear a ha or a what from the backseat. All of a sudden my friends in the back start screaming bloody murder. What is that? Go. Now. Without looking I floored that Cavalier and got out of Dodge. As we leave the area I figure this was a prank on me, so I tell the gang to fess up. I look back and see the girl in the back crying her eyes out telling me it wasn't a joke. Well shit, these guys are going for the Oscar. So I ask what they saw. One friend claims they first saw a light moving at the hilltop. The other friend says it was moving towards the car. Then the crying friend screams that something white crawled out from under the car. It was moving like a spider, it was so fast. One friend chimes in. The crying girl screams it was a dress. It was wearing a dress. I hauled ass out there at this point, but to this day they swear it was their skittering after us. So time passes. I go to school. One weekend I'm back in town and run into an old friend who fancies himself a local historian. Ghost stories come up, so I bring up that night on the hill. "Oh, Spook Hill. Your friend saw her." My curiosity is obviously piqued, so I ask to know more. He says in the 1800s a woman was killed in a carriage accident on the hill, right around a fenced area. The wagon wheels took her head off, but the others in the carriage, including her daughter, survived. Legend has it that she searches the hill at night with a lantern trying to find her way home. With a smile he says, "You're lucky she didn't follow you home, young man." I still remember that part. I checked and the story goes back to at least the 70s. All these years later, I live 500 miles away, and thinking of it still scares me. Like I said, Reddit, I'm a skeptic, but I always wonder about that night on Bale Hill and the lady and the lantern. So, I've had many creepy experiences, but this is the most recent one. 2 weeks ago, my mom and stepdad went away for a weekend trip, so I had the house to myself, just me and my dog. It was a Saturday night and I got home from work about 1 a.m. I needed to let my dog out, so I grab a cigarette and head outside. I live out in the country, so my house is completely surrounded by the woods. It's completely pitch black outside my house, even with our porch lights on. You cannot see shit in those trees. I have barely opened the door to my backyard, and I hear trees moving.
For a second, I thought it was just the sprinklers going off, but after listening for a few more seconds, I can hear the trees moving in different places, as if something was making its way through the trees.
It sounds massive, like grizzly bear-sized, slowly making its way through the brush about 10 yards away from me. I also live in a bayou-type area 20 minutes away from Galveston, Texas. What kind of fucking animal lives here that sounds like a goddamn baby elephant trudging through the woods? Thinking, hopefully, it was one of my neighbors, I yell out a helpless "who's there?" Nothing but branches snapping and trees limbs moving. I could not make out what the fuck was making that sound. Frozen in fear, I just stand halfway out the door, listening to this monster walk around my backyard. My dog is looking at me confused, whilst glancing towards the direction of the noise nervously. I call him back, and I reluctantly go upstairs to another door that opens towards the backyard, frantically searching for the cause. A mountain lion, coyote, an alligator, fucking anything, but I saw nothing. I finish listening to this beast make its way to the side of my house. That's when I slam the door and proceed to lock all of the doors in the house. If anyone has any knowledge of the Bay Area of Texas that can tell me what the hell I heard, that would be great. About 7 years ago I was living in a downtown complex in a busy city. I got home relatively late, till at 8 p.m., from work and was waiting for the elevator when an unfamiliar guy walked up beside me. The elevator stops, we both get on and I use my fob to select my floor, the 24th floor. The guy doesn't select any floor and instantly my gut started screaming at me. The elevator doors close and I ask him what floor he's going to or if he's visiting someone in the building. He tells me he's visiting someone on the 24th floor and proceeds to stare me down in an alarmingly creepy way. My instinct was to run, but since I was trapped in the elevator I had to think fast, and when the doors opened onto the 24th floor I said I forgot my mail and need to ride back down. He then tells me he'll keep me company in the elevator and rides down with me. I'm thinking in my head, fuck. I get out of the elevator and text my mom to call me. As I'm pretending to struggle with my keys to open my mailbox, thankfully my mom calls me back. I proceed to speak in Polish with her so this guy has no idea what I'm saying. I told her what was happening and she stayed on the phone with me for a good 30 minutes before this guy finally leaves the lobby and I bail and get on the elevator ASAP to my apartment. The next day I'm on Facebook and my friend sends me a link to a news story happening in our city. I open it and the police are warning women about a rapist in the area who they're trying to catch. The picture of the rapist in the news story is the guy who was in the elevator with me the night before. I was paranoid for a long time after. I guess it would be when I unexpectedly pissed off something in our house. It was early in the morning and I was no stranger to running around while getting ready. I'm notoriously late for everything, and high school was no exception. I was going up and down the stairs a lot at a fast pace. My routine was fairly disorganized. I remember coming out of my room because I needed something in the bathroom downstairs, and that's when I felt something off. It was as if the hallway had gotten darker somehow, and the general feeling of the room was unexpectedly hostile. It felt like you would feel if someone incredibly intimidating was just hovering over you, threatening to hurt you in whatever evil, twisted way they could. The only difference was that this cloud of anger was coming from the end of the hall opposite the stairs, but was reaching out in my direction. Feeling nervous and afraid, I turned towards the stairs. That's when I could feel something utterly and undeniably horrifying coming after me. It was as if a long, gnarled, clawed hand had shot out of the darkness and was inches away from grasping me. I ran as fast as I could down the stairs and into the bathroom, convinced that what was after me would cause me horrific pain if it managed to grab hold of me. I had never felt so much fear or vulnerability in my entire life until then. Fortunately, the presence had disappeared when I made it into the kitchen at the bottom of the stairs. It literally chased me down the hall and to the first floor, then retreated, or perhaps exerted too much of its energy and dissipated. Either way, it was gone. Whatever it was, it felt demonic. I may have woken up and pissed off a demon just by running around the house. Now, when I go up and down the stairs, I'm unusually mindful of the possibility I might be trespassing on something else's habitat. When I was in college, I got a research grant to do a comparison between tourism and ancient religious sites. I chose to focus on portals to the underworld in Greece and Belize. While in Belize, I became friends with a bartender who happened to have a sister who ran the books for travel company. The sister hooked me up with an amazing trip to a cave that just been opened. I went with 2 other guys who were training to be guides for the cave and the main guide who also brought his wife and kid. Prior to us arriving, only researchers have been allowed in. I was able to witness a Mayan purification ceremony before entering the cave. Inside I was able to see lots of ancient pots with chocolate dust in them, volcanic bloodletting knives and collection plates, and got to handle a stalagmite sacrificial club. We came to a carved stalagmite, and our guide told us about the Maya priests putting a torch at the base and the shadow that was cast would look like a jaguar. Our guide sat us down in front of it and pulled out a lighter. We turned off our headlamps and he lit his lighter at the base and held it there. The only light was coming from this silly little red lighter, but in the incredibly deep darkness of the cave, it cast a magnificent shadow that looked exactly like a silhouetted jaguar's head. As myself and the other guides watched in shock, the shadow on the wall opened and closed its mouth and started to turn its face towards us. As one, we all lit our headlamps and noped out of that room. As a teen, I worked as a janitor for one of the oldest theaters on the East Coast. The building had 4 floors which were all convoluted to travel to, as well as a crazy basement with tunnels leading to other buildings nearby that were darker than the special black paint. There were 4 pianos in this theater. One in the attic that was never played, one in the ballroom on the 4th floor, a huge grand piano locked away in a storage case on stage, and another piano directly beneath the stage. I frequently would go an hour or so after a show ended at midnight or 1 a.m. to go through and clean house. I would be the only person in the building at these times. There was always without fail the sound of someone climbing one of the staircases. The pianos often played even though there was no one there. They weren't player pianos. I also heard flute being practiced a few times. There were paintings on the 2nd floor that do that following you with their eyes thing. One night I'm working at 1:30 a.m. I'm vacuuming the carpet in the house, the audience seating area. I notice movement out of the corner of my eye. Standing beside the ghost light is a woman dressed like it's the late 1800s or something. I turn the vacuum off and ask her if I can help her. She smiled and shook her head no. I asked if she was looking for anyone and again she shook her head no. I was pretty freaked out but figured she was just messing with me and she was part of the show they were running at the time. I went back to vacuuming and after a while I looked back up and again there she was. She had walked out to the edge of the stage and she was dancing, spinning in circles and making her dress poof out. I stopped the vacuum and again asked if she needed anyone or anything. She smiled and shook her head no. I turned the vacuum on and went back to work. I heard a soft thank you, it looks so nice. I look up and she's gone. I hadn't looked down for long enough for her to get away, but she was gone. The next evening while I was cleaning, I heard a loud thump from the 2nd floor where the creepy paintings were. I walked upstairs to investigate. A large frame had talked from the wall, the nail had fallen out of the plaster. It's an early photograph of the man who paid for the theater's construction and his family. I recognized his wife. She was the one on stage the night before. I found out the play they were running was a thoroughly modern Millie or something like that. There were no period costumes involved. I told my manager about it and she told me I had met, I don't remember her name, the wife of the man who built the theater. I don't believe in ghosts, but I cannot explain anything about that. Other times I would be in the basement getting cleaning supplies and hear distinctly people running those tunnels, but there were no lights even connected down there and I saw no flashlights. That place messed me up pretty hard in high school. I've seen a number of things I can't explain, but the one that still gives me the biggest goosebumps is what I saw when I was 8 at my paternal grandparents' house. They lived in the woods, amusingly not too far from where I live now. The forest they lived in always felt off to me, it was dead silent. No birds, no bugs, just silence. At night I always felt like there was something just on the border of the pool of light from the house, watching. On this particular morning, I woke up in the couch bed my brother and I shared. I was on the side facing the window, he faced the door. The curtains were closed but the brilliant light of morning still shone through. And as I opened my eyes, I saw it. A silhouette of a deer, a buck, with the largest rack of antlers I had ever and still have ever seen. I stared at it, awestruck. And then it happened. In one fluid movement, the deer reared up on its hind legs, and just like that, it was no longer a deer, but the silhouette of a man. There were only 2 adult men in the area, my father and grandfather, and the silhouette of this man was different from both of them. Very muscular. The man looked to the side and strode off. I was struck with the sensation that I had seen something I probably shouldn't have. To this day I'm not sure what I saw. A part of me tries to explain it away that I was just waking up, but my gut tells me I really did see it. I was initially worried of living in the same area, in a forest too, but where I live is, thankfully, quite different, and full of life. But I still think of what it was I saw. When I was a teenager, my dad had a house in the Santa Cruz Mountains of California. The summer after 8th grade, when I was 13-14, he and I built a fort up there. It was really well constructed and very sturdy. It was partly dug into the ground, about 3 feet deep, and had a roof that came about 3 feet above ground. The roof was supported by 4 logs about 6 inches across and a little over 6 feet long and was made of 2x4s with some tarps to keep our train and brush and small trees over that as camouflage. I'm really trying to give y'all a good sense of how well this fort was built. On top of that, no one other than my dad and I knew where it was. No one. It was a 20-minute hike into very dense woods. So after working on this fort all summer, I asked my dad if I could spend the night out there alone and he agrees. So one night, I take my sleeping bag, a backpack full of snacks and water, a pocket knife, and my walking stick/spear out there. I get myself settled in and give my dad a phone call to let him know I'm okay. That was at about 9 p.m. Around 10 p.m. is when I started hearing the footsteps. They were heavier sounding than even my dad's, and he's 250 pounds easily. They were these heavy, distinct footsteps accompanied by an occasional deep exhale of breath. They seemed to be about 20 away circling my fort. After about 30 minutes of this, whatever was out there started throwing rocks at the fort, some hitting or bouncing across the slanted sides of the roof. Gradually the size of the rocks got bigger from the size of pebbles to the size of a fist. I checked the next morning. This went on until about 3 in the morning. All the while I'm sitting behind the door with my pocket knife open next to me and my walking stick/spear in my hands pointed at the door, too afraid to even contemplate falling asleep. Finally the being outside started tramping away. As it was going away, I heard it breaking tree limbs and gave it this blood-curdling growl. When I came out of the fort that morning, I examined the rocks and broken branches around the fort. As I wrote earlier, the rocks ranged in size anywhere from pebbles to about the size of a large man's fist. The beaches are what got me though. They were all above 7 feet in the air and were all about 3 inches across, so fairly thick. Many of them were green wood, making them even harder to break. To say the least, it would have taken something of immense strength to break them. When I got back to my dad's house, I asked him if he had been out to the fort to check on me that night. He told me no and left it at that. I give you all my word that I can trust whatever comes out of his mouth. To this day, I do not know what was out there that night. Alright, here it goes. I was taking part in one of those Edinburgh vault tours that are supposed to be a little bit creepy. We went through several rooms that had, according to the guide, different levels of supernatural phenomenons going on. From sounds, level 1, to sightings, 2, to somewhat physical contact, 3, everything nicely done, good storytelling, very colorful descriptions of what happened to people down there. Everyone was slightly scared, but on an exciting level. My group, 12 people, 6 women and 6 men, not assuming anyone's gender, got to the last room, a level 3. There was no light in there, every light bulb in here fails after a couple of hours. Yeah, I'm not booing that, thanks. And the girl that led the tour said that women in that room tend to get kind of attacked, so they should please line up on the right-hand wall, where light from the corridor was falling in. Guys to the left wall, completely in darkness. Everyone was hesitant about going in there, so I was like, grow a pair goddammit, and went into the room first. This resulted in me being furthest from the exit and the light. Next to me stood a really tall, bald guy from the Netherlands I think, who I guess didn't want to look scared, so he came in right behind me. After the ghost story from that room and a screaming girl running down the corridor to give everyone a little last shock for the giggles, the group was about to leave the room. I was walking towards the exit next to the tall bald guy, who's just in my peripheral vision. But somehow the real Dutch guy walks through the exit before me, while there is still something tall in corner of my eye. I realize what I just saw, blink, and turn around to an empty, dark room. I'm the last one, alone in there, 10 feet from the exit. So I turn back towards the exit and, I swear to God, suddenly I hear heavy footsteps behind me, approaching. Not echoes of my own steps, for I wasn't moving, nor something else. Heavy boots coming closer. I was convinced I was about to get dragged into the abyss, so I bolted out of that room, where my girlfriend was waiting. I was pale and covered in cold sweat, and I still can't scientifically explain what happened there. In 2009 I was deployed in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has a high risk for malaria, so while you are there, you have to take anti-malarial drugs. The one we took at the time was called mefloquine. They don't prescribe it anymore. Google it. One of the side effects of mefloquine was that it fucks with your dreams. Everyone responds to it slightly differently, but the most common thing is that it gives you really vivid and memorable dreams. I was working nights, 12-hour shifts, 6 nights a week. After a particularly grueling shift, the only thing on my mind was getting to sleep. I went straight to my room, hung my holster next to my bed and lay down. No sooner had I closed my eyes when I heard a loud noise from down the hall. Then another one, a loud, dull thud. At first I thought it was just a controlled detonation, but it was coming from the wrong direction. I got off my bed and went to the door to my room. As soon as my feet hit the floor I heard another thud, this time followed by some yelling and the distinct, rapid popping of small arms fire. I froze for a moment. The next thud, screams, popping came and spurred me into action. It was coming closer. I scrambled to retrieve my M9 from the holster, pulled the slide back slightly to ensure a round was chambered, and checked the magazine was secure. I went to the door, opened it slightly and peeked around the corner. What I saw was worse than anything I thought was possible. The local national workers that were hired to do the cleaning had somehow gotten their hands on weapons and were now going door to door through the dorm, kicking in doors and killing those inside. And they were coming my way. I closed the door to my room as quietly as I could and backed into the corner to the immediate left of the door. I trained my M9 on the door and clicked the safety off. Another thud. It was next door. Must have been empty, no gunfire. I was next. I was trembling harder than I have ever before or since. I couldn't keep the aim straight for shit. The door burst open. I shot up in bed, grabbed my M9 and backed into the corner. I waited. I waited for what seemed like an hour. Nothing. Not a sound. Eerie silence. I lowered my weapon and crept to the door, opening it as silently as I could and peeked down the hall. Nothing. I put my M9 back in its holster and strapped it on, then slowly made my way down the hall. Everything in order. No kicked-in doors, no fighting. No sounds except for the gentle hum of the fluorescent lights and the low murmur of everyday life outside. It was then that I noticed I was shaking like a leaf, heart rate through the roof, and sweating like I just ran a marathon. I took a few deep breaths and started to head back to my room when I heard a door open. Still jumpy, I spun around to see one of the lane workers from my dream. I didn't sleep for 3 days. I just laid wide awake in bed holding my M9.